Ashenmeres Legacy. To secure peace, Lady Rosamund of Langley was ordered to wed Lord Edmund de Clare, the man who had led the siege against her family's castle. She expected hatred in his gaze, but when he lifted her veil, his expression was unreadable. "You think I wanted this?" he murmured. "Then you don't know me at all." Chapter 1. The Summons of the King. The parchment felt cold against Rosamund's fingertips, the royal seal of King Henry a stark crimson blot against the creamy vellum. Her breath hitched in her throat, the words blurring before her eyes as the reality of their command sank into her very bones. "Lady Rosamund of Langley, you are hereby summoned to the King's Court at Westminster. Your presence is required without delay." The words were polite, formal, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. Her father, Lord Alaric of Langley, stood beside the window, his silhouette stark against the gray, overcast sky. He hadn't spoken since the royal messenger had departed, leaving the heavy silence of the solar to press down on them like a physical weight. Langley Castle, their ancestral home, had always felt like a sanctuary, a fortress against the turbulent world outside. But the recent siege, the brutal and unexpected attack led by Lord Edmund de Clare, had shattered that illusion. The scars of battle were still fresh, the scent of smoke still lingered in the air, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Rosamund traced the outline of a crack in the stone wall, a fissure caused by de Clare's trebuchets, a fissure that mirrored the one in her own heart. "Father," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "What does it mean?" Lord Alaric turned, his face etched with weariness and a grief that ran deeper than any wound. He was a man of war, a veteran of countless battles, but the recent defeat had aged him, stolen the fire from his eyes. "It means," he said, his voice raspy, "that the king seeks to consolidate his power, and he will use any means necessary." Rosamund knew what he meant. Langley, strategically located near the border with Wales, was a prize too valuable to be left in the hands of a weakened lord. King Henry, ever pragmatic, ever ruthless, would find a way to secure it. And the most likely way her stomach clenched at the thought was through marriage. He would not, she began, then stopped, unable to voice the fear that clawed at her throat. Marry her off to one of his loyal supporters? To a stranger? To an enemy? Her father met her gaze, his expression grim. "He would. And he will. The only question is to whom?" The answer came sooner than she expected. Just 3 days later, another messenger arrived, this one bearing not a summons, but a decree. Rosamund stood in the great hall, the assembled household silent and watchful, as the herald read the king's proclamation. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird, each word a hammer blow against her fragile hope. "And to ensure lasting peace between the houses of Langley and de Clare, it is decreed that Lady Rosamund of Langley shall be wed to Lord Edmund de Clare, Baron of Northwood, and Knight of the Realm." The words echoed in the vast hall, bouncing off the stone walls and the tapestries depicting scenes of Langley's glorious past. A collective gasp rose from the assembled servants and men-at-arms. Rosamund felt the blood drain from her face, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. Edmund de Clare, her enemy, the man who had laid siege to her home, who had killed her people, she couldn't even complete the thought. She had seen him, of course, during the siege. A fleeting glimpse from the battlements, a figure clad in steel, his face obscured by his helmet. He had been an implacable force, a storm of steel and fire that had threatened to consume them all. And now she was to be his wife. Her father stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "This cannot be," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I will not allow it." The herald, a young man with a nervous tremor in his voice, merely raised his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "My lord, it is the king's will. To defy it is treason." Treason. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Rosamund knew the implications. Defiance meant war, a war they could not win. It meant the utter destruction of Langley, the end of their lineage. She looked at her father, saw the conflict raging in his eyes, the battle between his love for her and his loyalty to his people. She knew what she had to do. Stepping forward, she placed a hand on her father's arm, her touch surprisingly steady. "Father," she said, her voice clear and strong, though her heart quaked within her, "it is the king's will. We must obey." Her father stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and pain. "Rosamond, you cannot mean it. To marry that butcher?" She forced herself to meet his gaze, to project a strength she did not feel. "It is for the good of Langley," she said. "For the good of our people. If this marriage can secure peace, then I will do it." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she held her head high, her gaze unwavering. She would not show weakness, not in front of her father, not in front of her people, and certainly not in front of the man who was to be her husband. The journey to Westminster was a blur of gray skies, muddy roads, and the constant, gnawing fear in her stomach. She barely spoke, barely ate, her thoughts consumed by the impending marriage. She imagined Edmund de Clare as a monster, a cruel and heartless warrior who would delight in her misery. The king's court was a whirlwind of activity, a dazzling display of wealth and power that only served to heighten Rosamond's sense of isolation. She was treated with a strained courtesy, a mixture of pity and veiled curiosity. She was, after all, the sacrificial lamb, the offering made to secure peace. The wedding ceremony was held in the royal chapel, a grand and imposing space filled with the scent of incense and the hushed whispers of the assembled courtiers. Rosamond wore a gown of ivory silk, embroidered with silver thread, a gift from the king. It felt heavy and constricting, a symbol of her gilded cage. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her steps measured and deliberate. She could feel the eyes of the court upon her, assessing, judging. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to betray the turmoil within. And then she saw him. Lord Edmund de Clare stood at the altar, waiting for her. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broad and powerful beneath his richly embroidered tunic. His hair was dark, almost black, and his eyes were not what she expected. She had anticipated hatred, coldness, perhaps even a flicker of triumph. But as he lifted her veil, his expression was unreadable. A strange mixture of intensity and was it sadness? He held her gaze for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to decipher some hidden meaning. Then he spoke, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "You think I wanted this?" he murmured, his breath warm against her cheek. "Then you don't know me at all." His words, so unexpected, so contrary to everything she had imagined, hung in the air between them. A question, a challenge, a hint of something more. Rosamond stared at him, her carefully constructed composure crumbling, replaced by a flicker of what? Curiosity? Hope? Or simply the desperate yearning for something, anything, to break through the icy fear that had gripped her heart. The priest began the ceremony, the familiar words washing over her, but Rosamond barely heard them. Her mind was reeling, her world tilting on its axis. Who was this man? This enemy who was now her husband? And what did his cryptic words truly mean? The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, heavier than the crown she did not wear, heavier than the chains of duty that bound her to this man. The ceremony ended. She was now Lady de Clare, and her life, her real life, was just beginning. Chapter 2. The Enemy's Embrace. The feast that followed the wedding was a lavish affair, a spectacle of wealth and power designed to impress and intimidate. Rosamond sat beside Edmund at the high table, acutely aware of the eyes upon them, the whispers that followed their every move. She picked at the food on her plate, the rich dishes tasteless in her mouth. The noise and the crowd pressed in on her, a suffocating wave of unfamiliar faces and veiled intentions. Edmund, for his part, seemed strangely detached from the festivities. He spoke little, answering questions with polite brevity, his gaze often drifting towards the large windows that overlooked the moonlit courtyard. He seemed a man burdened by a weight far heavier than the jeweled chain of office he wore. Rosamond stole glances at him, trying to reconcile the image of the ruthless warrior with the man beside her. His profile was strong, his jawline firm, But there were lines of weariness around his eyes, a hint of vulnerability that she hadn't expected. His hands, strong and calloused, rested on the table, and she found herself wondering about the battles they had fought, the lives they had taken, and perhaps the lives they had saved. She remembered his words in the chapel, the quiet intensity of his voice. "You think I wanted this? Then you don't know me at all." The question had haunted her throughout the ceremony, a nagging uncertainty that chipped away at her carefully constructed image of him. As the evening wore on, the musicians began to play, the lively tunes filling the hall. Couples rose to dance, their movements graceful and elegant, a stark contrast to the tension that simmered beneath the surface of the courtly gathering. Edmund turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Would you care to dance, my lady?" The invitation, though polite, felt more like a command. Rosamund hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs. To dance with him, to be held in his arms, felt like a betrayal of her family, of her people. But to refuse would be a breach of etiquette, a sign of disrespect that would be noted and whispered about throughout the court. "I am not a skilled dancer, my lord," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. A flicker of something amusement crossed his face. "I am not known for my grace on the dance floor either, my lady. But perhaps we can endure it together." He rose and offered her his hand. Rosamund, feeling as though she were stepping off a precipice, placed her hand in his. His touch was surprisingly warm, his grip firm but gentle. He led her onto the dance floor, and as the music swelled around them, they began to move. It was awkward at first, their steps hesitant and uncertain. Rosamund felt stiff and self-conscious, acutely aware of his closeness, of the heat of his body, of the scent of leather and spice that clung to him. But as they continued to dance, a strange sort of rhythm began to develop between them. Their bodies, initially resistant, started to move in a tentative harmony. She found herself looking at him, studying his face, searching for some clue to his true nature. His eyes, a deep, dark brown, met hers, and she saw a flicker of something there, of vulnerability that mirrored her own. "You are silent, my lady," he said, his voice low, barely audible above the music. "Does the company displease you?" "I am not accustomed to such gatherings," she replied, her voice still hesitant. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Nor I. I prefer the company of my soldiers to the intrigues of the court." His words surprised her. She had expected him to revel in the power and the privilege of his position. "You do not enjoy being a lord?" she asked, unable to keep the curiosity from her voice. A shadow crossed his face. "It is a duty, not a pleasure. A burden I bear for my family, for my people." His words resonated with her own feelings, her own sense of obligation to Langley. She found herself wondering about his family, about his life before the war, before he became her enemy. As they danced, their conversation became more intimate, their words softer, their gazes lingering longer. He spoke of his childhood home, of his love for horses and falconry, of his early training as a knight. She, in turn, spoke of her love for Langley, of her passion for embroidery and her skill with healing herbs. They discovered a shared love for the wild beauty of the countryside, a shared respect for the traditions of their ancestors, a shared weariness of the endless cycle of war and conflict. It was a fragile connection, a tentative bridge built across the chasm of their past, but it was there, undeniable and unexpected. The dance ended, and they returned to the high table, the silence between them no longer strained, but filled with a newfound understanding. Rosamund found herself looking at him with different eyes, seeing not just the enemy, but the man. Later that night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bedchamber of the royal palace, she thought of Edmund, of his words, of his touch, of the unexpected connection they had forged on the dance floor. The fear was still there, the uncertainty, the weight of her duty. But now, there was something else, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of possibility. She had been prepared to hate him, to resist him with every fiber of her being. But she was beginning to realize that hatred was a simple emotion, and Edmund de Clare was anything but simple. He was a complex, conflicted man, burdened by his own past, his own responsibilities. And she, his unwilling bride, was now inextricably linked to him, bound by the chains of duty and the unexpected stirrings of something more. The moon cast long shadows across the room, and Rosamond closed her eyes, her thoughts a tangled web of fear and hope, of duty and desire. She had entered the enemy's embrace, and she had no idea where it would lead her. But one thing was certain. Her life, her carefully ordered, predictable life, was over, and a new, uncertain, and potentially dangerous chapter had begun. She wondered, as sleep tugged at the edges of her consciousness, if she would find, in this forced union, an unexpected strength, a resilience she never knew she possessed. Or would she be consumed by the very forces that had brought them together? Only time, and the unfolding tapestry of their intertwined destinies, would reveal the answer. The soft hoot of an owl, a lonely sound in the vastness of the night, echoed her own sense of isolation and the uncertain path that lay ahead. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Stone Halls. The days that followed their wedding were a strange mixture of formality and awkward intimacy. Rosamond found herself navigating the unfamiliar corridors of Northwood Castle, Edmund's ancestral home, a fortress far grander and more imposing than Langley. The stone walls seemed to whisper secrets, the portraits of long-dead declares to watch her with judging eyes. She felt like an intruder, a stranger in a strange land. The castle staff, though polite, were reserved, their loyalty clearly belonging to their lord. Rosamond understood their suspicion. She was, after all, the daughter of their enemy, the woman forced upon their master. She tried to be gracious, to show respect for their customs and traditions, but she could feel the wall of mistrust between them. Edmund, too, remained an enigma. He was courteous, even attentive, but there was a distance in his eyes, a reserve that she couldn't penetrate. He spent much of his time attending to the affairs of his estate, overseeing the training of his knights, and dealing with the endless stream of petitions and disputes that came with his position. Rosamond, left to her own devices, explored the castle and its surroundings. She discovered a beautiful, walled garden, overgrown with roses and herbs, a place of quiet solitude where she could escape the stifling atmosphere of the castle. She spent hours there, tending to the neglected plants, finding a measure of solace in the familiar scent of the earth and the vibrant colors of the blossoms. She also discovered the castle chapel, a small, intimate space with stained glass windows depicting scenes from the Bible. She found comfort in the familiar rituals of prayer, in the quiet contemplation of the sacred space. It was there, one afternoon, that she encountered Lady Eleanor, Edmund's widowed aunt, the only other woman of noble birth residing in the castle. Lady Eleanor was a woman of advanced years, her face lined with wisdom and a hint of sadness. She was known for her piety and her sharp intellect, and Rosamond had been warned to be wary of her. But in the quiet solitude of the chapel, Lady Eleanor seemed different, less formidable, more approachable. "You find solace in prayer, Lady Rosamond?" she asked, her voice soft but penetrating. Rosamond, startled, looked up from her kneeling position. "Yes, my lady. It brings me comfort." Lady Eleanor nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "It is a comfort we all need in these troubled times. Especially you, my dear." Her words, though seemingly kind, held an undercurrent of something else, a hint of warning. Rosamond hesitated, unsure how to respond. "You must understand, Lady Rosamond," Lady Eleanor continued, "that this marriage, it is not what any of us wanted. Especially not Edmund." Rosamond felt a pang of guilt, a confirmation of her own fears. "I know, my lady. It was forced upon us both." Lady Eleanor studied her for a long moment, her eyes searching. "Forced, yes, but not without purpose. The king has his reasons, and they are rarely benevolent." Rosamond felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean, my lady?" Lady Eleanor sighed, her gaze drifting towards the stained glass windows. "This marriage, it is more than just a union of two families. It is a strategic alliance, a move in a larger game. A game that could have dire consequences for all of us. Her words, cryptic and unsettling, hung in the air. Rosamund felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that she was caught in a web of intrigue that she didn't understand. "Be careful, Lady Rosamund," Lady Eleanor said, her voice low and urgent. "Trust no one, not even your husband." With those words, she rose and left the chapel, leaving Rosamund alone with her growing fears and suspicions. The whispers in the stone halls seemed to grow louder, the shadows deeper. She was beginning to realize that Northwood Castle was not just a fortress, but a prison, a place of secrets and hidden dangers. Later that evening, Rosamund found herself alone with Edmund in the great hall. He was sitting by the fire, reading a scroll, his brow furrowed in concentration. She hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt him. But Lady Eleanor's words echoed in her mind, urging her to be cautious, to seek answers. "My lord," she began, her voice tentative, "may I speak with you?" He looked up, his expression surprised. "Of course, my lady. What troubles you?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Your aunt, Lady Eleanor, she spoke to me today. She said that this marriage was more than it seemed, that it was a strategic alliance, a move in a larger game." Edmund's expression hardened, his eyes becoming guarded. "My aunt is a wise woman, but she is also prone to speculation." Rosamund pressed on, determined to get to the truth. She said I should trust no one. Not even you." He set down the scroll, his gaze intense. "And, do you trust me, my lady?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Rosamund looked at him, at his strong, troubled face, and she realized that she didn't know the answer. She wanted to trust him. She yearned to believe in the tentative connection they had forged. But the whispers of doubt, the shadows of suspicion, were too strong. "I don't know, my lord," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to, but I don't know what to believe." He stood and walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped just a few feet away, his presence filling the space between them. "I understand your doubts, Rosamund," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I know I am not the husband you wanted. I know I am your enemy, the man who brought war to your doorstep. But I swear to you, I did not seek this marriage. I did not want to cause you pain." His words, so heartfelt, so contrary to everything she had been led to believe, resonated with her. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that he tried so hard to conceal. "Then why, my lord?" she asked, her voice pleading. "Why did you agree to it?" A shadow crossed his face, a flicker of pain. "Because," he said, his voice strained, "I had no choice. It was a matter of duty, of honor." He hesitated and, for a moment, she thought she would hear his confession. Then the walls went back up, a mask hiding his true self. "Some things are better left unsaid." He turned away from her, his shoulders slumping, as if the weight of his secrets were too heavy to bear. Rosamund watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of frustration and compassion. She was so close, she felt, to understanding him, to breaking through the walls he had built around himself. But the whispers in the stone halls, the warnings of his aunt, held her back. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Rosamund knew that she had reached an impasse, that she could not force him to reveal his secrets. She would have to find her own way, navigate the treacherous currents of Northwood Castle on her own. She would have to learn to read the whispers, to decipher the hidden meanings, to uncover the truth that lay buried beneath the surface of this forced union. And she would have to do it while guarding her heart, protecting herself from the man who was both her enemy and her husband. A sudden draft swept through the hall, causing the tapestries to sway and the flames to flicker. Rosamund shivered, not from the cold, but from the growing realization that she was alone, truly alone, in this game of shadows and secrets. And the stakes, she feared, were higher than she could possibly imagine. Chapter 4. The Falcon and the Dove. The following morning, Rosamund awoke to the sound of birdsong and the distant clang of steel on steel. She rose and dressed quickly, eager to escape the confines of her chamber. She found her way to the courtyard, where she saw Edmund practicing swordplay with his knights. He moved with a grace and power that was both breathtaking and intimidating. The sunlight glinted off his dark hair and the sweat-slicked muscles of his arms. He was a warrior, born and bred, and Rosamund couldn't help but feel a surge of both fear and admiration. As she watched, he disarmed one of his opponents with a swift, decisive move, sending the man's sword clattering to the ground. The other knights laughed, and Edmund offered his hand to help the fallen man up. There was a camaraderie amongst them, a bond forged in battle, that Rosamund envied. He noticed her standing there, watching, and he dismissed his men with a nod. He approached her, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Good morrow, my lady," he said, his voice slightly breathless. "You are up early." "I could not sleep," she replied, her gaze drawn to the sword he held in his hand. It was a magnificent weapon, the blade gleaming, the hilt inlaid with silver. "You admire my sword?" he asked, a hint of pride in his voice. "It is impressive," she admitted, her voice hesitant. He smiled, a rare and genuine smile that transformed his face. "It is more than just a weapon, my lady. It is a symbol of my family, of my heritage. It has been passed down through generations of declares." He offered her the sword hilt first. Rosamund hesitated, unsure whether to accept it. It felt wrong, somehow, to hold the weapon of her enemy, the instrument of her family's defeat. But she also felt a strange sense of curiosity, a desire to understand this man, this warrior, who was now her husband. She reached out and took the sword, her fingers brushing against his. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, a sensation that was both unsettling and strangely exciting. The sword was heavier than she expected, the weight of it a reminder of the power it represented. "It is well balanced," she said, trying to sound knowledgeable, though she knew little about swords. "Aye," he said, his gaze approving. "It is a fine blade, but it is useless without a skilled hand to wield it." He stepped closer, his body almost touching hers. He reached out and gently adjusted her grip on the hilt, his fingers lingering on hers. "Like this," he said, his voice low and intimate. "You must hold it firmly, but not too tightly. You must feel the balance, the weight, the power." His words, his touch, his closeness were intoxicating. Rosamund felt her cheeks flush, her heart beating faster. She was acutely aware of his presence, of the heat of his body, of the scent of leather and sweat that clung to him. He showed her a few basic stances, his movements slow and deliberate, his voice patient and encouraging. She tried to follow his instructions, but she felt clumsy and awkward, her movements lacking the grace and fluidity of his. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that surprised her. "Do not be discouraged, my lady. It takes years of practice to master the art of swordplay." I do not think I am meant to be a warrior," she said, her voice apologetic. "Perhaps not," he said, his gaze thoughtful. "But you have other strengths, my lady. Strengths that are just as valuable, just as powerful." He took the sword from her, their fingers brushing again. He sheathed the weapon with a practiced ease, and then he turned to her, his expression serious. "You are like a dove, Rosamund," he said, his voice soft. "Gentle, peaceful, compassionate. But I am a falcon, trained to hunt, to fight, to kill." His words, though poetic, were also unsettling. They highlighted the fundamental difference between them, the chasm that separated their worlds. "And yet," he continued, his gaze intense, "the falcon and the dove can sometimes find common ground. They can learn to coexist, to respect each other, perhaps even to protect each other." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Rosamund looked at him, at his strong, troubled face, and she saw a flicker of hope, a glimmer of possibility. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps they could find a way to bridge the gap between them, to forge a connection that transcended their past, their differences, their forced union. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. His touch was surprisingly tender, a stark contrast to the harshness of the sword he had just held. "I will not hurt you, Rosamund," he said, his voice earnest. I swear it. I may be a warrior, but I am not a monster. She wanted to believe him. She yearned to trust him. But the whispers of doubt, the shadows of suspicion, still lingered. She had seen the destruction he had wrought, the pain he had caused. Could she ever truly trust him? Could she ever truly forgive him? Before she answered, a shout rang from across the bailey. "My lord!" Riders approach. Edmund's hand dropped from her cheek, his expression instantly changing from tender to alert, wary, all night once more. "Who is it?" He barked at the guard. "They bear the banner of Lord Beaumont, my lord." And another. Edmund's eyes narrowed. Beaumont was a known ally, but the other? He turned to Rosamond, all trace of softness gone. "Stay here," he commanded curtly, not unkindly. "It is safer." He strode away, back towards his men, leaving Rosamond standing alone, the echo of his words, the falcon and the dove, ringing in her ears. The sudden shift in his demeanor, the swift return to the warrior, reminded her that their fragile peace, their tentative understanding, was built on shifting sands. And the approaching riders, whoever they were, threatened to shatter it completely. A sense of foreboding, cold and sharp, settled over her. The game, it seemed, was far from over. And she, the dove, was still trapped in the falcon's world. Chapter 5. A Glimmer of Trust. The riders, as it turned out, brought news that both relieved and unsettled Edmund. Lord Beaumont, a gruff, battle-scarred veteran, was indeed a trusted ally, bound to Edmund by oaths of fealty and shared campaigns. The other banner, however, belonged to Sir Gareth of Lyonesse, a knight known for his ambition and his shifting loyalties. His presence at Northwood was unexpected, and Edmund greeted him with cautious courtesy. Rosamond, confined to the castle as instructed, watched from a window overlooking the courtyard. She observed the meeting between the three men, the tense posture of Edmund, the jovial but guarded demeanor of Beaumont, and the smooth, almost oily charm of Sir Gareth. She couldn't hear their words, but she could sense the undercurrents of tension, the unspoken calculations that played out beneath the surface of their polite exchange. Later that evening, Edmund sought her out in the garden. He found her sitting on a stone bench, surrounded by the fragrant blooms of roses and lavender. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn, painting the scene in hues of gold and purple. "You seem troubled, my lady," he said, his voice soft, his expression concerned. Rosamond looked up at him, her heart heavy with a mixture of apprehension and a growing sense of connection. "The arrival of those riders, it disturbed you?" He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Beaumont brings news of unrest in the northern territories. Border skirmishes, rumors of rebellion, the usual troubles." "And Sir Gareth?" she asked, her voice hesitant. A shadow crossed his face. "Gareth is a different matter. He claims to come in friendship, offering his support in these uncertain times. But I do not trust him. He is a man who serves his own interests, not those of his allies." His honesty surprised her. She had expected him to be more guarded, to conceal his doubts and suspicions. But he seemed to be opening up to her, sharing his concerns, his vulnerabilities. "Why do you tell me this?" she asked, her voice curious. He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "Because I believe you are different, Rosamond. Because I see in you a strength, a wisdom, that goes beyond your gentle nature. Because I am beginning to trust you." His words, so unexpected, so heartfelt, sent a warmth through her, a feeling of hope that she hadn't dared to allow herself to feel. She had been so focused on his role as her enemy, on the pain he had caused her family, that she had forgotten that he, too, was a human being, capable of doubt, of fear, of trust. I am honored by your trust, my lord," she said, her voice sincere. "But I am still uncertain. I have been taught to distrust the de Clares." He nodded, his expression understanding. "I know, and I do not expect you to forget the past. But I hope that, in time, you will come to see me as I am, not as you were taught to believe." He sat down beside her on the bench, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, the scent of leather and spice that clung to him. The silence between them was no longer strained, but comfortable, filled with a growing sense of intimacy. "Tell me about Langley," he said, his voice soft. "Tell me about your life before all of this." And so she did. She spoke of her childhood, of her love for the rolling hills and the ancient forests that surrounded her home. She spoke of her family, of her close relationship with her brother, Thomas, who had fallen in the siege. She spoke of her passion for healing, of her knowledge of herbs and their medicinal properties. Edmund listened attentively, his gaze never leaving her face. He asked questions, genuine questions, that showed a real interest in her life, in her experiences. He, in turn, spoke of his own childhood, of his rigorous training as a knight, of his love for falconry and his deep sense of responsibility to his people. They talked for hours, until the moon had risen high in the sky and the garden was bathed in silver light. They discovered shared passions, shared values, a shared longing for peace and stability in a world torn by conflict. They found common ground, not in their shared duty, but in their shared humanity. As the night wore on, Rosamund felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble, the barriers of mistrust slowly giving way to a tentative, fragile hope. She saw in Edmund not just the enemy, but a man of honor, a man of courage, a man capable of compassion and perhaps even love. He walked her back to her chamber, their hands brushing occasionally, sending shivers of awareness through her. At her door, he paused, his gaze intense. "Rosamund," he said, his voice low and husky, "I know this marriage was not what either of us wanted. But I am beginning to believe that it might not be a curse. That it might, in fact, be a blessing." His words, so unexpected, so bold, took her breath away. She looked at him, at his strong, handsome face, and she saw a vulnerability there, a longing that mirrored her own. She reached out and gently touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the curve of his jawline. His skin was warm, slightly rough, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Perhaps," she whispered, her voice trembling, "perhaps you are right." He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a tentative, questioning touch. It was a brief kiss, a fleeting moment of contact, but it was enough to ignite a fire within her, a passion that she had long suppressed. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, a question in their depths. Rosamund, her heart pounding, her senses reeling, could only nod, a silent affirmation of her own desire. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his face. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a reverence that sent shivers down her spine. "Good night, my lady," he said, his voice soft. "Sleep well." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing at her door, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had shared a moment of genuine intimacy with her husband, her enemy, the man she was beginning to love. The glimmer of trust had grown stronger, brighter, and for the first time since her arrival at Northwood, Rosamund felt a sense of hope, a sense of belonging. But even as she savored this newfound connection, a nagging voice of caution whispered in the back of her mind. Sir Gareth's presence, the rumors of unrest, the whispers in the stone halls, all these reminders of the precariousness of her situation, of the dangers that still lurked in the shadows. She closed her chamber door, the heavy oak a solid barrier against the world, but not against the uncertainties of her own heart. The night, for all its beauty and promise, still held a hint of danger, a subtle threat that even the burgeoning trust between her and Edmund could not entirely dispel. Chapter 6. The Serpent in the Garden. The tentative peace that had blossomed between Rosamund and Edmund was soon threatened by the subtle machinations of Sir Gareth. He was a constant presence in the castle, his smooth words and charming demeanor masking a calculating mind. He sought Rosamund's company frequently, showering her with compliments and flattering attentions, ostensibly to ease her transition into the de Clare household. Rosamund, however, found his presence unsettling. There was something about his smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a coldness in his gaze that belied his warm words. She tried to be polite, to maintain a courteous distance, but he seemed determined to insinuate himself into her confidence. He often spoke of Edmund, praising his strength and his leadership, but always with a subtle undercurrent of criticism, a hint of doubt about his judgment. He would subtly question Edmund's decisions, suggesting alternative approaches, always framing his suggestions as being in the best interests of Northwood and its people. "Lord Edmund is a valiant warrior, my lady," he said one afternoon, as they walked together in the garden. "But he is perhaps too cautious, too hesitant to seize the opportunities that present themselves." Rosamund, wary of his intentions, tried to deflect his comments. "Lord Edmund is a wise leader, Sir Gareth. He considers all options carefully before making a decision." Gareth smiled, a smooth, practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Indeed, my lady. But sometimes caution can be a weakness. Sometimes one must be bold, decisive, even ruthless." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. He then subtly changed the subject, inquiring about her skills with herbs, a topic he knew she was passionate about. He praised her knowledge, suggesting that she could be of great service to the people of Northwood, perhaps even surpassing the efforts of Edmund's own healers. Rosamund, though flattered by his praise, felt a growing sense of unease. She recognized his attempts to sow discord, to drive a wedge between her and Edmund. She was beginning to see him for what he was, a serpent in the garden, a subtle poisoner of minds. She confided her concerns to Lady Eleanor, seeking the older woman's wisdom and guidance. Lady Eleanor listened attentively, her expression grave. "I warned you, my dear," she said, her voice low. "Gareth is not to be trusted. He is a man of ambition, and he will stop at nothing to achieve his goals." "But what are his goals?" Rosamund asked, her voice troubled. "What does he hope to gain?" Lady Eleanor sighed. "Power, my dear. Influence. He sees Edmund as an obstacle, a rival. And he sees you as a pawn in his game." Her words sent a chill down Rosamund's spine. She had suspected as much, but to hear it confirmed by Lady Eleanor was deeply unsettling. "He tries to turn me against Edmund," Rosamund said. "He subtly criticizes his decisions, suggests that he is not a strong leader." Lady Eleanor nodded. "He is a master of manipulation, my dear. He knows how to exploit weaknesses, how to sow seeds of doubt. You must be vigilant. Do not let him poison your mind." "I will try, my lady," Rosamund said, her voice determined. "But it is difficult. He is so persuasive." Lady Eleanor placed a comforting hand on her arm. "You are stronger than you think, Rosamund. You have a good heart, a clear mind. Trust your instincts. And trust Edmund." Her words, a surprising endorsement of her nephew, gave Rosamund a measure of comfort. She had seen the growing trust between her and Edmund, the genuine connection that had begun to develop. She would not let Gareth destroy it. That evening, Rosamund sought out Edmund, determined to share her concerns with him. She found him in his study, poring over maps and documents. He looked up as she entered, his expression weary but welcoming. "Rosamund," he said, a smile touching his lips. "What brings you here?" She hesitated, unsure how to begin. "My lord, I am concerned about Sir Gareth." His smile faded, his expression becoming guarded. "What about him?" She recounted her conversations with Gareth, his subtle criticisms, his attempts to undermine Edmund's authority. She told him of her conversation with Lady Eleanor, of the older woman's warnings. Edmund listened patiently, his expression growing darker with each word. When she had finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I knew he was ambitious," he said, his voice low and strained. "But I did not realize he would stoop to such treachery." He rose and walked to the window, his back to her. "I trusted him," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I considered him a friend." Rosamund felt a pang of sympathy for him. She understood the pain of betrayal, the sting of misplaced trust. She went to him and placed a comforting hand on his arm. "I am sorry, my lord," she said, her voice soft. "I know this is difficult." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that she had rarely seen. "Thank you, Rosamund," he said, his voice sincere.
for telling me,
for trusting me. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. His touch was warm, reassuring, and it sent a shiver of awareness through her. I will deal with Gareth, he said, his voice firm. He will not harm us. I swear it. His words, his touch, his unwavering gaze, gave her strength. She believed him. She trusted him. And she knew that, together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As she looked into his eyes, she realized that the serpent in the garden had inadvertently strengthened the bond between them, forging a deeper, more resilient connection. The trust, once a glimmer, was now a flame, and it burned brightly, defying the shadows that threatened to engulf them. Outside, a storm was gathering. The wind howled, rattling the window panes, mirroring the turmoil within the castle walls. But in that moment, surrounded by the brewing tempest, Rosamund felt a sense of calm, a sense of certainty. She was not alone. She had Edmund. And that, she knew, was all that mattered. Chapter 7. Shadows of the Past. The storm that raged outside mirrored the turmoil within Northwood's walls. Edmund, spurred by Rosamund's revelation, acted swiftly. He summoned Sir Gareth to the great hall, confronting him with his treachery in front of the assembled household. Gareth, his mask of charm finally slipping, denied the accusations at first, but faced with Edmund's unwavering gaze and the evidence of his own words, he eventually confessed. His ambition, it turned out, was far greater than anyone had suspected. He had been secretly plotting with a faction of rebellious lords, aiming to overthrow Edmund and seize control of Northwood for himself. He had hoped to use Rosamund as a pawn, manipulating her into supporting his claim, playing on her heritage and any lingering resentment she might harbor. Edmund, though betrayed and angered, showed remarkable restraint. He did not order Gareth's execution, as many expected. Instead, he stripped him of his knighthood and banished him from Northwood, warning him that any further attempt to undermine his authority would be met with swift and merciless justice. The incident, though resolved quickly, left a lingering unease in the castle. It served as a stark reminder of the precariousness of their position, of the constant threat of betrayal and rebellion. It also deepened the bond between Rosamund and Edmund, strengthening their trust and their reliance on each other. In the days that followed, Edmund became more open with Rosamund, sharing with her not only his present concerns, but also the shadows of his past. He revealed to her the story of his first wife, Ilara, who had died in childbirth 5 years earlier, along with their unborn child. He spoke of Ilara with a tenderness and a grief that touched Rosamund deeply. He described her as a woman of great beauty and spirit, a woman he had loved deeply and passionately. He confessed that her death had left him shattered, consumed by guilt and sorrow. He had vowed never to marry again, believing that he could never love another woman as he had loved Ilara. I built walls around my heart, Rosamund, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I became a warrior, a lord, but I ceased to be a man. I shut myself off from all feeling, all emotion. Until you. His words, so vulnerable, so honest, resonated with Rosamund. She understood his pain, his grief, his fear of opening himself up to love again. She, too, had built walls around her heart, protecting herself from the pain of loss and betrayal. I understand, she said, her voice soft. I, too, have known loss. My brother, he died in the siege. And I blamed you. He nodded, his gaze meeting hers. I know. And I do not blame you. I would have done the same. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. But we cannot live in the past, Rosamund, he said. We cannot let our grief consume us. We must find a way to move forward, to build a new life, together. His words, his touch, his unwavering gaze, gave her strength. She saw in him not just the warrior, not just the lord, but a man who had suffered, a man who had loved, a man who was capable of great compassion and great love. I want to help you, Edmund, she said, her voice sincere. I want to help you heal. I want to be your wife. Not just in name, but in heart and soul. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a reverence that sent shivers down her spine. "And I want you to be my wife, Rosamund," he said, his voice husky. "Not just a political alliance, not just a duty, but a true partner, a true love." Their conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. They began to spend more time together, sharing their thoughts, their fears, their hopes for the future. They rode together through the countryside, exploring the beauty of Northwood's lands. They worked together in the garden, tending to the roses and herbs. They prayed together in the chapel, finding solace in their shared faith. Rosamund began to take a more active role in the running of the household, using her knowledge of healing herbs to care for the sick and injured. She earned the respect of the castle staff, who came to see her not just as the forced bride, but as a compassionate and capable lady. One evening, as they sat together by the fire in the great hall, Edmund presented her with a gift. It was a small, silver locket, intricately carved with the image of a falcon and a dove intertwined. "This belonged to Alara," he said, his voice hesitant. I want you to have it." Rosamund was deeply touched by his gesture. It was a symbol of his trust, of his acceptance of her as his wife, of his willingness to share his past with her. "Thank you, Edmund," she said, her voice trembling. "It is beautiful." She opened the locket and found a small, faded portrait of Alara inside. She studied the image of the woman who had come before her, the woman Edmund had loved so deeply. She felt a pang of not jealousy, but a strange sort of kinship, a shared connection to this man who had touched both their lives. She closed the locket and fastened it around her neck, the silver cool against her skin. It was a reminder of the past, but also a symbol of the future, of the new life they were building together. The shadows of the past still lingered, but they were beginning to recede, replaced by the growing light of their love. Rosamund knew that there would be challenges ahead, that their path would not be easy. But she also knew that, with Edmund by her side, she could face anything. The walls around her heart had crumbled, replaced by a love that was stronger, more resilient, than she had ever thought possible. Outside, a gentle rain fell. Inside, a new warmth had begun to grow. A sense of peace, fragile but real, settled over them. And the locket, a symbol of two loves, rested close to Rosamund's heart. Chapter 8. The Price of Peace. The peace that Rosamund and Edmund had begun to forge was, as always in their turbulent world, fragile. News arrived from the king's court, a summons that both dreaded. King Henry, ever watchful, ever manipulative, had decreed a grand tournament to be held at Westminster, a display of strength and unity intended to quell the rumors of rebellion and consolidate his power. Edmund was commanded to attend, to bring with him a contingent of his finest knights, and to participate in the jousting and the melee. The summons was presented as an honor, a recognition of Edmund's prowess as a warrior, but Rosamund saw the underlying threat. It was a test, a challenge, a way for the king to assess Edmund's loyalty and to keep him under his watchful eye. Rosamund, too, was summoned to attend, a requirement that both surprised and unsettled her. She was not a warrior, not a participant in the games of power and politics. Her place, she believed, was at Northwood, tending to her duties and supporting her husband. Edmund, however, insisted that she accompany him. "It is safer for you to be with me, Rosamund," he said, his voice firm. "The king's court is a dangerous place, filled with intrigue and treachery. I would not leave you here, vulnerable and unprotected." She understood his concerns, but she also sensed another reason for his insistence. He wanted her by his side, not just for protection, but for companionship, for support, for the strength that he drew from her presence. He had come to rely on her, to trust her, to love her. And so, they prepared for the journey to Westminster, a journey that filled Rosamund with a sense of foreboding. She knew that the king's court was a place of hidden dangers, of shifting alliances, of treacherous plots. She feared for Edmund's safety, for his reputation, for the fragile peace they had built together. The journey itself was arduous, a long and tiring trek through muddy roads and dense forests. But it also provided them with a time of quiet intimacy, a chance to strengthen their bond before facing the challenges that awaited them. They arrived at Westminster to a flurry of activity, the castle and its surroundings teeming with knights, nobles, and courtiers from across the realm. The air was thick with anticipation, with rivalry, with the scent of horses and sweat and the clang of steel. Rosamund was immediately struck by the opulence and the extravagance of the court, a stark contrast to the more austere environment of Northwood. The ladies wore gowns of silk and velvet, adorned with jewels and elaborate headdresses. The men strutted in their finest armor, their swords gleaming, their banners flying. She felt out of place, a simple country lady amidst the glittering throng. But Edmund, ever attentive, stayed by her side, introducing her to the various nobles and courtiers, protecting her from the curious stares and the whispered comments. She soon discovered that she was a subject of much interest, the betrayer's bride, the woman who had been forced to marry her enemy. Some looked at her with pity, others with scorn, and a few with a veiled curiosity that made her uneasy. She endured the scrutiny with grace and dignity, holding her head high, her gaze unwavering. She would not show weakness, not in front of these people, not in front of the king. She was Lady de Clare, and she would represent her husband and her new family with pride. The tournament began with great fanfare, the king presiding over the events with a regal air. Edmund, clad in his shining armor, his family crest emblazoned on his shield, looked every inch the noble warrior. He participated in the jousting with skill and courage, unhorsing several opponents and earning the cheers of the crowd. Rosamund watched from the royal box, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and pride. She saw the danger of the sport, the brutal force of the impacts, the risk of serious injury. But she also saw the skill, the courage, the honor that Edmund displayed. During a break in the jousting, King Henry summoned Rosamund to his side. He greeted her with a polite smile, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "Lady Rosamund," he said, his voice smooth, "you are a welcome addition to our court. Your marriage to Lord Edmund has done much to secure peace in the realm." His words, though seemingly complimentary, were laced with a subtle threat. Rosamund understood that she was being assessed, judged, her loyalty to her husband and to the king being weighed. "Thank you, your majesty," she replied, her voice calm and respectful. "I am honored to serve the realm." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. "You are a woman of surprising strength, Lady Rosamund, a strength that could be of great value to the crown." His words, his tone, his veiled implication, sent a chill down her spine. She realized that the king saw her not just as a wife, but as a potential asset, a pawn in his political games. And the price of that peace, she began to understand, might be far higher than she had ever imagined. The conversation was interrupted by the restart of the competition. But the king's gaze lingered a moment too long. The subtle threat, the unspoken demand for loyalty, hung heavy in the air. Rosamund, though outwardly calm, felt a growing sense of unease. The tournament, she realized, was not just a display of strength, but a web of intrigue, a battleground of hidden agendas. And she, the dove, was caught in the midst of it all. Chapter 9. A Dance of Deception. The tournament continued for several days, a relentless cycle of jousting, melees, and feasting. Rosamund found herself caught in a whirlwind of social obligations, forced to navigate the treacherous currents of courtly etiquette and veiled intrigue. She attended banquets, dances, and receptions, always under the watchful eye of the king and his courtiers. She learned to decipher the subtle cues, the hidden meanings behind the polite smiles and the flattering words. She saw the rivalries, the jealousies, the ambition that simmered beneath the surface of the courtly gatherings. She realized that she was surrounded by potential enemies, by people who would use her, betray her, to further their own interests. She found an unexpected ally in Lady Anne, the king's niece, a young woman of Rosamund's age who seemed genuinely kind and compassionate. Lady Anne, unlike many of the other courtiers, treated Rosamund with respect, offering her friendship and guidance in navigating the complexities of court life. "Be careful, Rosamund," Lady Anne warned her one evening as they strolled together in the palace gardens. "There are many here who would seek to use you, to manipulate you. Trust no one completely." Her words echoed Lady Eleanor's earlier warning, reinforcing Rosamund's sense of unease. She had already experienced the subtle machinations of Sir Gareth, and she knew that the king's court was a far more dangerous place than Northwood. "I know," Rosamund replied, her voice troubled. "The king he sees me as a pawn, a tool to be used to control Edmund." Lady Anne nodded, her expression grave. "He does. And he is not alone. There are others who would seek to influence you, to turn you against your husband." She paused, then added, her voice low and urgent, "Be especially wary of Lord Morion. He is a close advisor to the king, and he is known for his ruthlessness." Rosamund had already encountered Lord Morion, a tall, imposing man with a cold, calculating gaze. He had treated her with a polite courtesy, but she had sensed a hidden agenda beneath his smooth words. She had felt his eyes on her, assessing, judging, and it had made her deeply uneasy. "I will be careful," Rosamund said, her voice determined. "I will not let them use me." Lady Anne smiled, a genuine smile of support. "I know you won't. You are stronger than you think, Rosamund. And you have a good heart. That is your greatest weapon." Her words gave Rosamund a measure of comfort, but the dangers of the court remained ever present. She found herself constantly on guard, carefully weighing her words and actions, trying to anticipate the hidden agendas of those around her. She also observed Edmund closely, watching how he navigated the treacherous waters of court politics. He was a skilled warrior, but he was also a shrewd diplomat, able to parry the veiled threats and subtle challenges of the king and his courtiers. He maintained a careful balance between loyalty and independence, asserting his authority while remaining respectful of the king's power. One evening, during a grand ball, Rosamund found herself dancing with Lord Morion. He was a skilled dancer, his movements graceful and elegant, but his touch was cold, his gaze unsettling. "You are a captivating woman, Lady Rosamund," he said, his voice smooth and oily. "A woman of great beauty and influence." Rosamund, wary of his intentions, tried to maintain a polite distance. "Thank you, my lord," she replied, her voice neutral. He continued to shower her with compliments, praising her intelligence, her grace, her loyalty. He subtly suggested that she could be of great service to the king, that she could use her influence over Edmund to further the interests of the crown. "Lord Edmund is a valiant warrior," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "But he is sometimes too independent, too resistant to the king's will. You, my lady, could guide him, persuade him to be more amenable." Rosamund felt a surge of anger at his blatant attempt to manipulate her. She recognized his words for what they were, a veiled threat, a subtle attempt to turn her against her husband. "My lord," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering, "my loyalty is to my husband and to Northwood. I will not betray him." Morion's smile faded, his eyes hardening. "You are making a mistake, Lady Rosamund," he said, his voice cold. "A mistake that could have consequences." He released her from the dance, leaving her standing alone on the dance floor, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and fear. She had defied him. She had refused to be his pawn. But she knew that she had made an enemy, a powerful and dangerous enemy. She sought out Edmund, telling him of her conversation with Morion. Edmund listened intently, his expression grim. "I knew Morion was a snake," he said, his voice low and angry. "But I did not realize he would be so bold." He took her hand, his touch reassuring. "Do not worry, Rosamund," he said. "I will protect you. He will not harm you." His words, his touch, his unwavering gaze, gave her strength. But she knew that the dance of deception was far from over. She had made a stand. She had chosen loyalty over manipulation. But the price of that choice, she feared, could be high. The evening ended with a sense of impending doom. The veiled threats, the subtle manipulations, The constant pressure, it was all taking its toll. Rosamund, though outwardly composed, felt the strain. She knew that she and Edmund were walking a tightrope, and one wrong step could send them tumbling into the abyss. Chapter 10. Beneath the Banners of War. The final day of the tournament arrived, bringing with it the grand melee, a chaotic and brutal free-for-all battle involving dozens of knights. It was a spectacle of violence and skill, a test of strength and endurance, and a dangerous game where serious injuries were common. Rosamund watched from the royal box, her heart in her throat. She had pleaded with Edmund not to participate, fearing for his safety, but he had insisted. It was a matter of honor, a demonstration of his loyalty to the king, and a display of his strength to his rivals. He rode into the arena, clad in his full armor, his family crest emblazoned on his shield. He looked magnificent, a true warrior, but Rosamund could only see the danger, the potential for harm. The melee began with a deafening roar, a clash of steel on steel, a chaotic swirl of horses and men. Rosamund struggled to follow Edmund in the midst of the fray, her eyes scanning the battlefield, her heart pounding with fear. She saw him unhorse several opponents, his sword flashing in the sunlight, his movements skilled and decisive. But she also saw the brutality of the combat, the blows he took, the near misses that made her gasp. At one point, she saw him surrounded by 3 knights, their swords raised to strike. Her breath caught in her throat, her hands clenching the railing of the royal box. She closed her eyes, unable to watch, fearing the worst. But then, she heard a roar from the crowd, a cheer of triumph. She opened her eyes and saw Edmund still standing, his sword raised in victory, his opponents lying on the ground. He had prevailed, against all odds. The melee continued for what seemed like an eternity, a brutal and exhausting contest. Finally, the horn blew, signaling the end of the battle. Edmund, bruised and battered, but unbowed, emerged as one of the victors. Rosamund rushed to meet him as he rode out of the arena, her relief overwhelming. She threw her arms around him, her tears flowing freely. "Edmund," she cried, her voice choked with emotion. "I was so afraid." I thought he held her close, his arms strong and reassuring. "I am here, Rosamund," he said, his voice hoarse. "I am safe." He was covered in dust and sweat, his armor dented and scratched, but his eyes were shining with triumph and something more. Love. Undeniable, unwavering love. The king, though outwardly pleased with Edmund's victory, seemed to harbor a growing resentment. He had witnessed Edmund's strength, his skill, his popularity with the crowd. He saw him not just as a loyal subject, but as a potential rival, a threat to his own power. That evening, during the final banquet, the king announced his decision to send Edmund north, to quell the growing rebellion in the border territories. It was presented as an honor, a recognition of Edmund's military prowess, but Rosamund saw the underlying motive. It was a way to remove Edmund from court, to send him to a dangerous and volatile region, to weaken his power base. Edmund accepted the king's command with a stoic grace, his expression betraying no hint of his true feelings. He knew that to refuse would be seen as treason, a challenge to the king's authority. But Rosamund saw the anger, the frustration, the sense of betrayal that simmered beneath his calm exterior. She knew that this was Morian's doing, a subtle manipulation of the king, a way to eliminate a rival. She felt a surge of anger at the injustice of it all, at the way Edmund was being used, manipulated, sent into harm's way. Later that night, as they prepared to leave Westminster, Rosamund confronted Edmund, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "This is not right, Edmund," she exclaimed. "The king is sending you to your death. It is Morian's doing, I know it." Edmund sighed, his expression weary. "I know, Rosamund, but I have no choice. I am a knight, sworn to obey my king. But it is unjust," she cried. "You have proven your loyalty, your strength. Why should you be punished for it?" He took her hands, his touch gentle and reassuring. "It is the price of peace, Rosamund," he said. "The price of protecting Northwood, of protecting you. His words, his sacrifice, his unwavering commitment to his duty, touched her deeply. She saw the burden he carried, the weight of his responsibilities, the sacrifices he was willing to make. "I will go with you," she said, her voice firm. "I will not stay behind. I will be by your side, whatever happens." He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I knew you would say that," he said. "You are my strength, Rosamund. My courage. My love." They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating as one. They knew that they were facing a dangerous and uncertain future, that the banners of war were calling them to a perilous task. But they also knew that they would face it together, united by their love, their loyalty, their shared commitment to each other and to their people. The journey north would be long and arduous, but they would face it with courage and determination, their bond stronger than ever before. Beneath the threat of war, their love had blossomed, a fragile flower in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. And they would protect it, nurture it, with every fiber of their being. The trumpets sounded, a call to arms, a summons to duty. But for Rosamund and Edmund, it was also a call to love, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Chapter 11. The Knight's Confession. The journey north was a stark contrast to the opulent splendor of the king's court. The roads were rough, the weather harsh, and the constant threat of ambush loomed over them. They traveled with a small contingent of Edmund's most trusted knights, a loyal band of warriors who had proven their courage and their fidelity time and again. Rosamund, though accustomed to the comforts of castle life, adapted to the rigors of the journey with surprising resilience. She rode alongside Edmund, her presence a source of strength and comfort to him. She tended to the minor injuries of the soldiers, using her knowledge of healing herbs to ease their suffering. She shared their meals, their hardships, their camaraderie. She saw a different side of Edmund on this journey, a side that went beyond the noble lord and the skilled warrior. She saw the leader, the commander, the man who inspired loyalty and devotion in his men. He was firm but fair, decisive but compassionate, always concerned for the well-being of those under his command. He also revealed a vulnerability that he had rarely shown before. He spoke of his fears, his doubts, his anxieties about the task ahead. He confessed that he was not fearless, that he felt the weight of responsibility, the burden of leadership. "I am not a hero, Rosamund," he said one evening, as they sat together by the campfire, the stars glittering above them. "I am just a man trying to do what is right." Rosamund, touched by his honesty, reached out and took his hand. "You are more than just a man, Edmund," she said, her voice soft. "You are a good man, a brave man, a noble man. And you are my husband, the man I love." His eyes met hers, his gaze intense. He squeezed her hand, his touch conveying a depth of emotion that words could not express. "I love you, Rosamund," he said, his voice husky. "I never thought I could love again after Alara. But you have shown me that it is possible. You have healed my heart. You have given me hope. You have made me whole." His confession, so heartfelt, so unexpected, brought tears to her eyes. She had longed to hear those words, had yearned for his love, but she had never dared to hope that he would feel the same way about her. "I love you too, Edmund," she whispered, her voice trembling. "With all my heart, with all my soul." They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating as one. The campfire crackled, the wind whispered through the trees, but all they could hear was the sound of their own breathing, the rhythm of their love. That night, beneath the vast, starlit sky, they consummated their marriage, their union a testament to their love, their commitment, their shared destiny. It was not just a physical act, but a spiritual bonding, a joining of two souls who had found each other in the midst of chaos and conflict. The following days, as they neared their destination, the reality of their mission began to weigh heavily upon them. They received reports of growing unrest, of rebel forces gathering strength, of atrocities committed against loyal subjects of the king. Edmund knew that he faced a difficult and dangerous task. He would have to fight not only to quell the rebellion, but also to win the hearts and minds of the people, to restore peace and stability to the region. He gathered his knights, his council of war, and Rosamund, surprisingly, asked to attend. He initially hesitated, wanting to shield her for the grim realities, but she looked him in the eye and simply stated, "I am your wife, your partner. Let me share this burden." He relented. Rosamund sat beside Edmund, listening intently as the knights reported on the enemy's strength, their positions, their tactics. She observed Edmund's leadership, his ability to analyze the situation, to formulate a strategy, to inspire his men. She also noticed something else. One of the knights, Sir Baldric, a veteran warrior who had served Edmund for many years, seemed uneasy, his gaze shifting, his answers evasive. She sensed a hidden tension, a subtle undercurrent of doubt. She decided to speak to Edmund privately that night and shared her concerns about Baldric, trusting her intuition. Edmund, though initially skeptical, listened to her carefully. He knew that Rosamund possessed a keen insight, an ability to read people that he often lacked. "I will watch him," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Thank you, Rosamund, for your wisdom." He drew her close, and they found solace, one last time it seemed, in each other's arms. They spoke of a better future, of a life beyond war and conflict, a life of peace and happiness. Rosamund knew, deep within her heart, the confession from Edmund had opened a door to the future, but also one that unveiled the full picture of his past. The truth of Alara's death, she sensed, was not as simple as childbirth. There was something more, something hidden, something that still haunted Edmund, fueling his doubt, his fears. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the coming battle would reveal not only the fate of the rebellion, but also the final, hidden secrets of Edmund's heart. The wind picked up outside, whistling a mournful tune. A premonition, cold and sharp, pierced Rosamund's heart. The knight's confession had opened their hearts to one another, but it also seemed to have ushered in a storm of a different kind, one that threatened to tear them apart. Chapter 12. A stolen moment in the moonlight. The eve of the battle arrived, casting a long, somber shadow over the encampment. The air was thick with tension, with the anticipation of violence, with the unspoken fear that gripped the hearts of even the most seasoned warriors. Edmund's forces had established a strategic position near a small village, overlooking the valley where the rebel army was encamped. The two forces were evenly matched, promising a bloody and protracted conflict. Rosamund, despite her own fears, tried to maintain a calm and reassuring presence. She moved among the soldiers, offering words of encouragement, tending to their minor injuries, and sharing their meager rations. She saw the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty of their fate, but she also saw their courage, their loyalty to Edmund, their determination to fight for what they believed in. She found Edmund standing alone on a small hill overlooking the valley, his gaze fixed on the distant fires of the rebel encampment. He was clad in his armor, his sword at his side, his face grim and resolute. She approached him quietly, placing a hand on his arm. He turned to her, his expression softening as he saw her. "Rosamund," he said, his voice low, "you should be resting. Tomorrow will be difficult." "I could not rest," she replied, her voice sincere. "I needed to be with you." He smiled, a weary smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You are my strength, Rosamund," he said. "My anchor in the storm." He drew her close, embracing her tightly. She could feel the tension in his body, the weight of responsibility that he carried. "I am afraid, Edmund," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Afraid for you, afraid for our future." He stroked her hair, his touch gentle and reassuring. "I know," he said. "I am afraid too. But we will face this together. We will survive this. We must." They stood there for a long moment, embraced in the moonlight, finding solace in each other's presence. The world around them seemed to fade away, the threat of battle receding into the background. All that mattered was their love, their connection, their shared hope for a future beyond the violence. "Do you remember the garden at Northwood?" Rosamund asked, her voice soft. The roses, the lavender, the quiet peace we found there? Edmund nodded, a wistful smile touching his lips. I do. It seems a lifetime ago. We will return there, Edmund, she said, her voice firm. We will rebuild our lives. We will create a new garden, a new future. Together. He kissed her then, a long, passionate kiss that spoke of love, of longing, of desperation. It was a kiss that defied the darkness, that challenged the threat of death, that affirmed their commitment to each other. I love you, Rosamund, he said, his voice husky. More than words can say. And I love you, Edmund, she replied, her voice trembling. With all my heart. They spent the remaining hours before dawn together, talking, sharing their hopes and dreams, finding comfort in each other's arms. They spoke of their future children, of the life they would build at Northwood, of the peace they would strive to create. As the first rays of light began to paint the eastern sky, Edmund prepared for battle. He donned his helmet, his face becoming hidden behind the steel visor. He looked like a stranger, a warrior, a figure of war. Rosamund, her heart aching, reached out and touched his gauntlet. Come back to me, Edmund, she said, her voice pleading. Please come back. He covered her hand with his own, his grip firm and reassuring. I will, he said, his voice muffled by the helmet. I swear it. I will fight for you, for our future, for our love. He mounted his warhorse, a magnificent destrier that pawed the ground impatiently. He raised his sword, signaling his knights to prepare for battle. Rosamund watched as he rode away, leading his men towards a valley, towards the waiting enemy. She felt a surge of pride, of love, of fear. She knew that she might never see him again, that this stolen moment in the moonlight might be their last. She climbed to the highest point of the hill, watching as the two armies clashed in a deafening roar of steel and screams. The battle had begun, and her heart was breaking. She could only pray for his safety, pray for his return, pray for a miracle. The sun rose higher, casting a bloody glow upon the battlefield. And Rosamund, the dove amidst the falcons, stood alone, her love a beacon in the darkness, her hope a fragile flame against the winds of war. She whispered a prayer, a plea to any god who might be listening, a desperate cry from a wife's heart. Protect him. Bring him home. The battle raged below, and the future, their future, hung precariously in the balance. Chapter 13. The Lion's Denver. The battle raged throughout the day, a brutal and relentless struggle that seemed to have no end. Rosamund, from her vantage point, could only watch in agonizing helplessness, her heart torn between hope and despair. She saw the banners of Northwood rise and fall, the tide of battle shifting back and forth, the outcome uncertain. She tended to the wounded who were brought back from the front lines, her hands stained with blood, her heart heavy with sorrow. She saw the horrors of war, the brutal reality of violence, the cost of conflict. She prayed for each man, friend or foe, her compassion extending to all who suffered. As the day wore on, news from the battlefield became increasingly grim. The rebel forces, though initially outnumbered, were fighting with a fierce determination, driven by desperation and a hatred of the king's rule. Edmund's forces were suffering heavy losses, their advance stalled, their morale flagging. Rosamund received reports of Edmund's bravery, of his unwavering leadership, of his fierce determination to win the battle. But she also heard whispers of doubt, of fear, of the growing possibility of defeat. Late in the afternoon, a messenger arrived, his face pale, his voice trembling. "My lady," he said, his words choked with emotion. "Sir Baldric, he has betrayed us. He has led a contingent of our own men to the enemy's side." Rosamund felt a cold dread wash over her. She had suspected Baldric's treachery. She had warned Edmund, but her warning had come too late. The betrayal was a devastating blow, a turning point in the battle. "And Lord Edmund?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, fearing the answer. The messenger hesitated, his gaze avoiding hers. He fights on, my lady. But the situation is dire." Rosamund knew what he meant. Edmund was trapped, Surrounded by enemies, his forces dwindling, his chances of survival slim. She felt a surge of despair, a crushing weight of grief. She had lost her brother to war, and now she was about to lose her husband, the man she loved, the man who had given her hope, a future. But then something shifted within her. A spark of defiance, a flicker of determination, ignited in her heart. She would not give up. She would not surrender to despair. She would do whatever she could, however small, to help Edmund, to save him. She gathered the remaining healers, the women of the village, and a handful of loyal soldiers who had not yet joined the battle. "We cannot stand idly by," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "We must do something. We must help Lord Edmund." Her words, so unexpected, so bold, inspired them. They looked at her, this woman who had been forced to marry her enemy, this woman who had shown them compassion and kindness, this woman who is now their leader. "What can we do, my lady?" one of the women asked. Rosamund had a plan, a desperate, dangerous plan, born of her knowledge of the terrain and her understanding of the rebel forces. She knew that the rebels were fighting for their homes, their families, their freedom. She believed that there might be a way to reach them, to negotiate a truce, to end the bloodshed. "We will go to the rebel camp," she said, her voice determined. "We will speak to their leader. We will offer them terms." Her plan was met with stunned silence. It was madness, they said. Suicidal. The rebels would kill them on sight. But Rosamund was resolute. "We have nothing to lose," she said, "and everything to gain. If we can save even one life, it will be worth it." She convinced them, her courage, her determination, her unwavering belief in the possibility of peace, swaying their hearts. They prepared for their perilous mission, their hearts pounding with fear, but also with a newfound sense of purpose. As dusk began to fall, Rosamund, accompanied by her small band of followers, set out for the rebel camp, venturing into the lion's den, her heart filled with a mixture of dread and hope. She carried no weapons, only a white flag of truce and a desperate plea for peace. She knew that she was risking her life, but she was willing to pay the price for Edmund, for Northwood, for the chance of a future free from violence. She walked towards the enemy, her steps measured and deliberate, her gaze fixed on the distant fires, her love for Edmund her shield and her guiding star. The fate of the battle, and perhaps the fate of the kingdom, rested on her shoulders, the shoulders of a woman who had been taught to hate, but who had chosen to love, to heal, to fight for peace in a world consumed by war. Chapter 14. The Betrayal Unveiled. Rosamund and her small band approached the rebel camp under the cover of twilight, the white flag of truce held high. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, of sweat, of fear. They were met by a group of armed rebels, their faces grim, their eyes filled with suspicion.
"Who are you?"
one of the rebels demanded, his voice harsh. "What do you want?" Rosamund stepped forward, her head held high, her gaze unwavering. "I am Lady Rosamund de Clare," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Wife of Lord Edmund de Clare. I come seeking your leader. I come to speak of peace." Her words caused a stir among the rebels. They had heard of her, the betrayer's bride, the woman who had been forced to marry their enemy. Some looked at her with hatred, others with curiosity, and a few with a flicker of respect. After a tense moment of deliberation, they agreed to take her to their leader. She was escorted through the camp, a chaotic scene of tents, campfires, and armed men. She saw the faces of the rebels, hardened by war, weary of conflict, but also filled with a fierce determination to fight for their freedom. She was brought before a large tent, guarded by 2 heavily armed warriors. Inside, she found the rebel leader, a man named Gareth, not the banished knight, but a distant cousin, a man who shared the name and, it seemed, the ambition. He was a tall, powerfully built man with a weathered face and a fierce gaze. He sat on a makeshift throne, surrounded by his lieutenants. "So," Gareth said, his voice deep and resonant, "the betrayer's bride comes to beg for mercy. What have you to offer?" Rosamund stood before him, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. I do not come to beg, but to offer a chance for peace. This battle, it is needless. It is costing lives on both sides. There is another way. Gareth laughed, a harsh, cynical sound. Peace? You speak of peace. After your husband has brought war to our lands, after he has killed our people? My husband was sent here by the king, Rosamund replied. He is a soldier, bound by duty. But he is also a man of honor, a man who desires peace. And what of Baldric's betrayal? Gareth countered. Was that also a part of your husband's honorable plan? Rosamund explained her suspicions and the events that she believed led to the treachery. Baldric acted alone, for that. My husband grieves greatly for his lapse in judgment. Gareth was silent, his expression unreadable. He was considering her words, weighing her offer, assessing her sincerity. He seemed more reasonable than she expected. Let us speak plainly. I know something of honor. De Clare fights well. Too well. Gareth stood and walked to a table where a crude map had been laid. We can continue this bloodshed, for days perhaps.
More will die. Or
we can strike to the true enemy. The king? Rosamund asked, seeking clarification. He cares nothing for us. Nor your husband, it seems. He sent him here to die, to weaken a potential rival. Gareth looked at her, seeking something. Truth? Understanding? Baldric told us much before he expired. Rosamund's blood ran cold. She asked the question she already knew the answer to. What did he tell you? Gareth leaned in close. That De Clare's first wife, Alara? She did not die in childbirth. She was murdered. By orders of the king. He feared the alliance it represented, the power it would give De Clare. Rosamund gasped, the revelation hitting her like a physical blow. The shadows of the past, the secrets that had haunted Edmund, were finally revealed. It was a truth far more terrible than she had ever imagined. Baldric, Gareth continued, was the one who carried out the deed. He was loyal to the king then, but the guilt it consumed him. He sought redemption, a way to atone for his sins. He saw in this rebellion a chance to strike back at the king, to avenge Alara's death. Rosamund felt a wave of nausea, of grief, of understanding. She finally understood Edmund's pain, his sorrow, his reluctance to love again. He had been carrying this burden, this secret, this betrayal, for years. And Edmund, does he know? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Gareth shook his head.
No.
Baldric never told him. He feared his wrath, his vengeance. He hoped that by joining our cause he could somehow make amends. Rosamund felt tears welling in her eyes. Tears for Alara, tears for Baldric, tears for Edmund, and tears for herself. She had been living a lie, a carefully constructed illusion of peace built on a foundation of secrets and betrayal. We can end this, Gareth said, his voice surprisingly gentle. We can join forces, march on Westminster, and bring the king to justice. We can avenge Alara, avenge our fallen, and create a new realm, a realm of peace and justice. His offer, so unexpected, so bold, took her breath away. It was a chance for revenge, a chance for justice, a chance to build a better future. But it was also a dangerous gamble, a betrayal of her own vows, a path that could lead to even more bloodshed. She looked at Gareth, at his fierce, determined face, and she saw a glimmer of hope, a possibility of a different outcome. She thought of Edmund, fighting alone, betrayed by his own men, facing certain death. She thought of Alara, murdered in cold blood, her memory defiled by the king's treachery. She made her decision. I will join you, she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. But on one condition. Edmund must live. He must be spared. He is innocent in all of this. Gareth smiled, a genuine smile of respect. Agreed, he said. He will be spared. And he will have a chance to join us, to fight for a just cause. A new kingdom, a new beginning. The betrayal had been unveiled, the truth revealed, and Rosamund, the betrayer's bride, had become a rebel, a leader, a woman who would fight for justice, for revenge, for the memory of a murdered woman, and for the love of a man who had been betrayed by his king. The battle lines had been redrawn, the alliances shifted, and the future of the realm hung precariously in the balance. The lion's den had become a refuge, and the enemy had become an ally. And Rosamund, the dove, had found her wings, ready to soar into the storm, to fight for a future free from the shadows of the past. Chapter 15. Flight from the Citadel. The agreement struck between Rosamund and Gareth was a dangerous gamble, a desperate attempt to turn the tide of the battle and topple a tyrant. The plan was audacious. A combined force of Rosamund's loyalists and Gareth's rebels would launch a surprise attack on Edmund's remaining forces, not to kill, but to capture. The goal was to convince Edmund of the king's treachery and to persuade him to join their cause. As night fell, Rosamund led her small band back to the battlefield, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that the success of their plan depended on their ability to reach Edmund before it was too late, before he was killed or captured by the remaining loyalist forces. The battlefield was a scene of chaos and carnage, the remnants of the day's fighting scattered across the blood-soaked ground. The air was thick with the stench of death, the cries of the wounded echoing in the darkness. Rosamund and her followers moved stealthily through the battlefield, avoiding the scattered pockets of fighting, searching for Edmund. They finally found him near the center of the battlefield, surrounded by a small group of his loyal knights, fighting desperately against a larger force of loyalists who, unaware of the shift in alliances, continued to fight for the king. Rosamund, seeing her husband on the brink of defeat, acted quickly. She ordered her followers to charge into the fray, not to attack Edmund's men, but to create a diversion, a gap in the lines that would allow her to reach him. The sudden arrival of Rosamund's forces, flying the white flag of truce alongside Gareth's banner, caused confusion and chaos among the loyalist soldiers. They hesitated, unsure whether to attack or to hold their ground. Rosamund used the opportunity to break through the lines, reaching Edmund's side. "Edmund," she cried, her voice urgent. "Stop. You must listen to me." Edmund, exhausted and bloodied, looked at her in disbelief. "Rosamund, what are you doing here? It is too dangerous. There is no time to explain," she said. "The king, he betrayed you. Alara, she was murdered. By his orders." Her words, so shocking, so unexpected, pierced through the fog of battle. Edmund stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief, then with dawning horror. What are you saying?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Before Rosamund could explain further, Gareth and his rebels joined the fray, attacking the remaining loyalist forces, not to kill, but to disarm and capture. The sight of the rebels fighting alongside Rosamund's followers and the white flag still waving finally convinced Edmund that something was terribly wrong. "Hold!" he roared, his voice commanding. "Cease fighting. Something is amiss." His knights, though confused and hesitant, obeyed his command. The fighting slowly subsided, the battlefield falling silent except for the moans of the wounded. Gareth approached Edmund, his expression grim but respectful. "Lord de Clare," he said, his voice clear and strong. "We have much to discuss. The king has betrayed us all." Edmund, still reeling from Rosamund's revelation, listened as Gareth explained the truth about Alara's death, about Baldric's betrayal, about the king's treachery. He showed Edmund the evidence, the confessions of captured loyalists, the intercepted messages that revealed the king's plot. Edmund's world crumbled around him. The truth, so long suppressed, so carefully concealed, was finally revealed. He felt a wave of grief, of rage, of betrayal. He had served his king loyally, he had fought his battles, he had sacrificed his happiness, all for a lie. He looked at Rosamund, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "You knew?" he asked, his voice trembling. Rosamund nodded, her tears flowing freely. "I did. Gareth told me." I could not let you die, Edmund. Not without knowing the truth." He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Thank you, Rosamund, he said, his voice husky. For saving me. For loving me. He turned to Gareth, his expression resolute. What is your plan? He asked. Gareth explained their intention to march on Westminster, to overthrow the king, to establish a new realm of peace and justice. He invited Edmund to join them, to lead their combined forces, to avenge Alara's death, and to build a better future. Edmund, his heart filled with a burning desire for revenge, for justice, for a world free from tyranny, agreed. He would join their cause, he would fight alongside them, he would lead them to victory. The alliance was forged, the die was cast. The former enemies, united by a common cause, prepared to flee the battlefield, to escape the reach of the king's remaining forces, to gather their strength and to launch their rebellion. They gathered the wounded, both loyalists and rebels, tending to their injuries, offering them a chance to join their cause. Many, disillusioned by the king's treachery, agreed. As dawn approached, they set out, a ragtag army of former enemies, united by a shared purpose, led by a betrayed lord and a courageous lady, marching towards an uncertain future, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and fear. They were fleeing the citadel of the king's power, but they were also marching towards a new dawn, a new beginning, a chance to build a better world. The battle had been lost, but the war had just begun. And Rosamund, the dove who had become a falcon, was at the forefront, her love for Edmund her guiding star, her determination her unwavering shield. They rode not into the sunrise, but away from it, towards the dark heart of the kingdom, where their true enemy awaited. Chapter 16. Sanctuary in the Wildwood. The journey from the battlefield to a place of relative safety was fraught with peril. Edmund, Rosamund, and Gareth, leading their combined forces, had to evade the king's patrols, navigate treacherous terrain, and secure supplies for their growing army. They chose to seek refuge in the Wildwood, a vast, ancient forest that bordered Edmund's lands. It was a place known for its dense undergrowth, its hidden paths, and its reputation as a haven for outlaws and rebels. The Wildwood offered them a degree of protection, a place to regroup, to plan their next move, and to rally support for their cause. But it was also a harsh and unforgiving environment, a place where survival was a constant struggle. Rosamund, despite her noble upbringing, adapted to the hardships of life in the Wildwood with remarkable resilience. She used her knowledge of herbs to treat the sick and wounded, she helped to forage for food, and she shared the burdens of leadership with Edmund and Gareth. She also found herself in a unique position, a bridge between the two factions, the former enemies who were now united by a common cause. She had earned the trust of both Edmund's loyal knights and Gareth's rebels, her compassion, her courage, and her unwavering commitment to justice transcending the old divisions. The time in the Wildwood also allowed for a deeper exploration of the bond between Edmund and Rosamund. They had declared their love for each other, but the weight of Edmund's past, the revelation of Alara's murder, still hung heavy between them. One evening, as they sat together by a small campfire, Edmund spoke of Alara, sharing with Rosamund the details of their life together, of his love for her, and of the devastating grief he had felt at her death. I blamed myself, Rosamund, he confessed, his voice raw with emotion. I thought that if I had been a better husband, a stronger protector, she would still be alive. Rosamund reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring.
It was not your fault, Edmund, she said.
It was the king's cruelty, his treachery, that took her from you.
I know that now, he said.
But for years, I carried that guilt, that burden. It had consumed me. And now? Rosamund asked, her voice soft. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and gratitude. Now, he said, I have you. You have shown me that it is possible to love again, to heal, to find hope in the darkness. He drew her close, embracing her tightly. I love you, Rosamund, he said, his voice husky. More than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Edmund, she replied, her voice trembling. With all my heart. Their time in the Wildwood was not just about survival and strategy, it was also about healing, about forging a deeper connection, about building a foundation for their future. As the days passed, their numbers grew. Word of their rebellion spread, and men and women from across the region, disillusioned by the king's tyranny, flocked to their banner. They were a diverse group, knights, soldiers, peasants, farmers, all united by a common desire for justice and freedom. Edmund, with Gareth's assistance, trained them, forging them into a formidable fighting force. Rosamund, using her skills as a healer and her natural leadership abilities, organized the logistics, ensuring that they had enough food, supplies, and medical care. They established a hidden camp deep within the Wildwood, a sanctuary where they could plan their attack on Westminster, their ultimate goal. It was a dangerous and audacious plan, but they were determined to succeed. They would overthrow the king, avenge Alara's death, and create a new realm, a realm of peace and justice. One night, under a full moon that cast an ethereal glow upon the forest, Edmund and Rosamund stood together on a small rise overlooking their encampment. They could see the campfires burning, hear the murmur of voices, feel the spirit of hope and determination that permeated their growing army. "We have come a long way, Rosamund," Edmund said, his voice filled with awe. "We have," she replied, her gaze meeting his. "And we have much further to go." He took her hand, his touch sending a shiver of awareness through her. "I never imagined," he said, "that I would find myself fighting alongside my former enemies, leading a rebellion against my king." "Life is full of surprises, Edmund," she said, her voice soft. "And sometimes, the greatest surprises are the most beautiful." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You are my greatest surprise, Rosamund," he said. "My greatest blessing." He leaned down and kissed her, a long, passionate kiss that spoke of love, of commitment, of shared destiny. They were standing on the precipice of a great battle, a battle that would determine the fate of the realm. But in that moment, all that mattered was their love, their connection, their unwavering belief in each other, and in the future they were fighting to create. The Wildwood, once a place of refuge, had become a crucible, forging them into something stronger, something new. And they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, their hearts united, their spirits unyielding. The sanctuary had nurtured not only their rebellion, but also their love, preparing them for the final confrontation that awaited. Chapter 17. Scars of the Heart. As the preparations for their assault on Westminster intensified, Rosamund found herself increasingly drawn to the stories of those who had joined their cause. She listened to their tales of hardship, of injustice, of loss, under the king's tyrannical rule. She realized that their rebellion was not just about avenging Alara's death or overthrowing a corrupt monarch. It was about building a better future for all, a future free from oppression and fear. One evening, she sat by the campfire with a group of women who had lost their husbands and sons to the king's wars. They shared their stories, their grief, their anger, but also their hope for a new beginning. "Lady Rosamund," one of the women said, her voice filled with a mixture of respect and awe, "you are a noble woman, a lady of privilege. Why do you risk your life for us, for common folk?" Rosamund looked at them, her heart filled with compassion. "I may have been born into privilege," she said, "but I have also known loss, betrayal, and pain. I have seen the suffering that the king has inflicted upon his people, and I cannot stand idly by while injustice prevails." She shared with them the story of her forced marriage to Edmund, of her initial hatred for him, and of the gradual realization that he, too, was a victim of the king's treachery. She spoke of Alara's murder, of Edmund's grief, and of their shared desire for justice. "We are all fighting for the same thing," she said, "for a future where our children can live in peace, where justice prevails, where love and compassion guide our actions." Her words resonated with the women, forging a bond of solidarity, of shared purpose. They saw in her not just a noble woman, but a leader, a woman of courage and compassion, a woman who understood their pain and shared their hopes. Rosamund's empathy and understanding extended not only to the common folk, but also to the former loyalist soldiers who had joined their ranks. She knew that they carried the burden of their past actions, the guilt of having served a corrupt king. She made it a point to speak with them, to listen to their stories, to offer them forgiveness and a chance to redeem themselves. One such soldier was Sir Kevern, a knight who had fought alongside Baldric and had been deeply affected by his betrayal. He approached Rosamund one evening, his head bowed, his voice filled with shame. "My lady," he said, "I do not deserve your kindness. I served the king. I fought against Lord Edmund. I was a part of the injustice." Rosamund looked at him, her gaze filled with compassion. "You were misled, Sir Kevern," she said. "You were following orders, believing that you were serving a just cause. But now you have chosen a different path. You have chosen to fight for justice, for freedom. And that is all that matters." She offered him her hand, a gesture of forgiveness and acceptance. He took it, his grip trembling, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, my lady," he said, his voice choked with emotion,
"for giving me a second chance."
Rosamund's ability to heal not only physical wounds, but also the scars of the heart, became a crucial element in forging a united and determined army. She helped to bridge the divides between former enemies, to create a sense of shared purpose, to build a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Edmund, witnessing Rosamund's interactions with their growing forces, was filled with admiration and love. He saw her not just as his wife, but as his partner, his equal, a leader in her own right. "You have a gift, Rosamund," he said to her one evening as they walked together through the encampment. "A gift for healing, for inspiring, for uniting people." Rosamund smiled, her gaze meeting his. "It is not a gift, Edmund," she said. "It is simply love. Love for our people, love for justice, love for you." He drew her close, embracing her tightly. "And that love," he said, "is the greatest weapon we have." As their preparations neared completion, a scout arrived bearing urgent news. The king, learning of their growing rebellion and their presence in the wildwood, had dispatched a large force to hunt them down and crush their movement. The news created a sense of urgency, of impending danger. They had to act quickly before the king's forces could reach them. They finalized their plans for the assault on Westminster, a daring and audacious plan that would require all their courage, skill, and determination. Edmund gathered all the troops and spoke with them, with Rosamund by his side. "The king believes us to be hiding. He thinks we are afraid." Edmund's voice boomed across the clearing. "But we will show him what fear truly is. We will march on his den, and we will take back what is ours. What is rightfully everyone's." A roar went up from the crowd, a sound of defiance, of hope, of anger given purpose. The scars of the heart, both old and new, had begun to heal, replaced by a fierce determination to fight for a better future. Rosamund, the woman who had once been a symbol of division, had become a unifying force, a beacon of hope in a world consumed by darkness. And as they prepared to march out of the wildwood, they were no longer just an army of rebels, they were a family, bound together by love, loyalty, and a shared dream of a new dawn. Chapter 18. The Reckoning at Dawn. The march on Westminster was a testament to the unity and determination that Rosamund and Edmund had forged. The rebel army, a diverse mix of knights, soldiers, and common folk, moved with a surprising discipline and efficiency, their spirits bolstered by the hope of a better future and the desire for justice. They avoided major roads, traveling through forests and hidden paths, relying on the support of local villagers who had grown weary of the king's oppressive rule. Rosamund, riding alongside Edmund, played a crucial role in maintaining morale and ensuring the well-being of their forces. She used her knowledge of healing herbs to treat the sick and injured, and her calm demeanor and unwavering optimism inspired confidence and courage. As they neared Westminster, the tension grew. Scouts reported that the king's forces were aware of their approach and were preparing for a siege. The city was heavily fortified, its gates barred, its walls manned by a large garrison of loyalist soldiers. Edmund and Gareth, recognizing the difficulty of a direct assault, devised a daring plan. They would use a network of secret tunnels, known only to a few, to infiltrate the city and launch a surprise attack from within. The tunnels, remnants of an ancient Roman settlement, were rumored to be unstable and dangerous, but it was their only hope of breaching the city's defenses. Rosamund, though initially hesitant about the risky plan, recognized its necessity. She insisted on accompanying Edmund and Gareth, refusing to be left behind. "I am your wife, your partner," she said. "I will be by your side, whatever happens." On the eve of their assault, Edmund and Rosamund shared a quiet moment together, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "We have come so far, Rosamund," Edmund said, his voice filled with emotion. "From enemies to lovers, from captives to rebels, we have defied all odds. And we will continue to defy them, Edmund," Rosamund replied, her gaze meeting his. "We will fight for our future, for our love, for the hope of a better world." He drew her close, embracing her tightly. "I love you, Rosamund," he said, his voice husky. "More than life itself." "And I love you, Edmund," she replied, her tears flowing freely. "With all my heart and soul." They knew that the coming battle would be the most dangerous and decisive of their lives, that their fate and the fate of the realm hung precariously in the balance. But they were ready to face it, together, their love their shield and their guiding star. At dawn, under the cover of darkness, Edmund, Rosamund, Gareth, and a small band of their most trusted soldiers entered the secret tunnels, leaving the main body of their army outside the city walls, ready to launch a diversionary attack. The tunnels were narrow, dark, and claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. They moved slowly, cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Rosamund, despite her fear, held her head high, her determination unwavering. As they navigated the labyrinthine passages, they encountered unexpected obstacles, collapsed sections of tunnel, treacherous pits, and swarms of rats. But they pressed on, their resolve strengthened by their shared purpose. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached their destination, a hidden chamber beneath the king's castle. From there, they would launch their surprise attack, striking at the heart of the king's power. They emerged from the tunnels, finding themselves in a dimly lit cellar. They quickly and quietly subdued the few guards who were present, their movements swift and silent. Edmund, Rosamund, and Gareth, leading their small band of warriors, stealthily made their way through the castle corridors, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They knew that they had to act quickly before the alarm was raised. They reached the Great Hall, where the king was holding a morning council with his advisors, including the treacherous Lord Morian. The doors were unguarded, the king confident in the security of his heavily fortified castle. Edmund, with Rosamund and Gareth at his side, burst into the Great Hall, their swords drawn, their faces grim and resolute. "Henry of Westminster," Edmund roared, his voice echoing through the hall. "Your reign of terror is over. I, Edmund declare, have come to claim my justice." The king, startled and enraged, leaped to his feet, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. "Declare," he shouted. You dare betray me?" "You betrayed me first, your majesty," Edmund replied, his voice cold and hard. "You murdered my wife, you plotted against my life, you oppressed your people. And now you will pay the price." The reckoning had begun. The dawn, breaking over Westminster, illuminated not a city of peace, but a battleground where the fate of the kingdom would be decided. And Rosamund, the betrayer's bride, stood beside her husband, ready to fight for justice, for revenge, for the future they had dreamed of. The surprise was complete, the battle joined, and the outcome uncertain. Chapter 19. A Kingdom Divided. The sudden appearance of Edmund, Rosamund, and Gareth in the Great Hall threw the king's court into chaos. The advisors scattered, the guards hesitated, and the king, momentarily stunned, fumbled for his sword. Lord Morian, however, reacted swiftly. He drew his own sword and lunged at Edmund, his face contorted with rage. "Traitor!" he screamed. "You will die for this." Edmund parried Morian's attack, their swords clashing in a shower of sparks. The two men fought fiercely, their movements swift and deadly, their hatred for each other fueling their every blow. Rosamund, though unarmed, did not stand idly by. She saw one of the king's advisors attempting to escape, presumably to raise the alarm. She quickly grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table and threw it with all her might, striking the advisor in the back of the head, knocking him unconscious. Gareth and his men engaged the remaining guards, a fierce melee erupting in the great hall. The clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, and the shouts of the combatants filled the air. The king, recovering from his initial shock, finally drew his own sword and joined the fray, attacking Edmund with a desperate fury. He was a skilled swordsman, but he was no match for Edmund, who was fueled by years of pent-up rage and a burning desire for justice. Edmund fought with a ferocity that Rosamund had never seen before. He was not just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Alara, for his people, for the future they had dreamed of. He disarmed the king, his sword point pressed against the monarch's throat. "It is over, Henry," Edmund said, his voice cold and hard. "Your reign of terror is at an end." The king, defeated and trembling, glared at Edmund with hatred and defiance. You will never rule this kingdom," he spat. "The people, they will never accept you." "The people will accept justice," Edmund replied. "They will accept a ruler who cares for their well-being, who respects their rights, who governs with compassion and wisdom." He lowered his sword, refusing to kill the unarmed king. "I will not become like you, Henry," he said. "I will not rule through fear and violence. You will be tried for your crimes, and you will face the judgment of your people." Meanwhile, Gareth and his men had subdued the remaining guards, securing the great hall. The battle was over, the king defeated, his court in disarray. But the victory was far from complete. The king's loyalist forces outside the city walls, alerted by the fighting within, launched a fierce attack, attempting to break through the gates and rescue their monarch. The main body of the rebel army, led by Sir Kevern, who had proven his loyalty beyond any doubt, met the loyalist attack with equal ferocity. A bloody battle raged outside the city walls, the fate of the kingdom hanging in the balance. Edmund, leaving the king in the custody of Gareth and his men, rushed to join the fighting outside, Rosamund at his side. They rallied their forces, inspiring them to fight with renewed courage and determination. The battle was long and brutal, a clash of steel and will, a struggle for the very soul of the kingdom. But the rebel army, fueled by their desire for justice and their belief in Edmund and Rosamund's leadership, fought with a ferocity that the loyalist forces could not match. Slowly, gradually, the tide of the battle began to turn. The loyalist forces, demoralized by the news of the king's capture and weakened by their own internal divisions, began to falter. Finally, after hours of intense fighting, the loyalist forces broke and fled, their resistance shattered. The battle was won, the rebellion victorious. Westminster, the heart of the kingdom, was in the hands of Edmund and Rosamund, the betrayer's bride and the betrayed lord, now hailed as liberators. But the victory was bittersweet. The cost of the battle had been high, many lives lost on both sides. The kingdom was divided, the wounds of the conflict deep and raw. Edmund and Rosamund, standing on the city walls, overlooking the blood-soaked battlefield, knew that their true challenge had just begun. They had overthrown a tyrant, but now they had to rebuild a nation, to heal the divisions, to forge a new future. They had the support of many, but pockets of loyalists still dotted the kingdom. The sun, setting over Westminster, cast a long, somber shadow over the city. The kingdom was divided, the future uncertain. But Edmund and Rosamund, standing hand in hand, their love a beacon in the darkness, were ready to face the challenges ahead, to build a new realm, a realm of peace, justice, and hope. The victory had been won, but the true work, the work of healing and rebuilding, was just beginning. And they would face it together, their hearts united, their spirits unyielding. Chapter 20. The Queen's Decree. The days following the capture of Westminster were a whirlwind of activity. Edmund, with Rosamund at his side, worked tirelessly to establish order, to secure the city, and to begin the long process of healing and rebuilding. The king was imprisoned, awaiting trial for his crimes. Lord Morion, his treacherous advisor, had been killed in the fighting. Many of the king's loyalists had either fled or surrendered, pledging their allegiance to Edmund. But the kingdom remained divided. Pockets of resistance remained, loyalist forces who refused to accept Edmund's rule. There were also those who doubted Edmund's ability to lead, who questioned his motives, who feared that he would become just another tyrant. Edmund, aware of these challenges, knew that he had to act quickly and decisively to unite the kingdom and to establish his legitimacy as a ruler. He called for a grand council, inviting representatives from across the realm, nobles, clergy, and common folk, to gather at Westminster and discuss the future of the kingdom. Rosamund played a crucial role in this process. She used her influence, her compassion, and her growing reputation as a leader to reach out to those who were skeptical of Edmund, to persuade them to join the council, to give him a chance to prove himself. She also worked tirelessly to address the immediate needs of the people of Westminster, who had suffered greatly during the siege and the fighting. She organized the distribution of food and supplies. She established hospitals to care for the wounded, and she comforted those who had lost loved ones. The Grand Council convened in the Great Hall of Westminster, the same hall where Edmund had confronted the king just days earlier. The atmosphere was tense, filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Edmund, standing before the assembled representatives, addressed them with a powerful and moving speech. He spoke of his own past, of his betrayal by the king, of his love for Alara, and of his desire for justice. He acknowledged the suffering that the kingdom had endured, and he promised to rule with compassion, wisdom, and fairness. "I am not a king," he said. "I am a servant of the people. I will not rule through fear and violence, but through justice and compassion. I will listen to your voices, I will respect your rights, and I will strive to build a better future for all." His words resonated with many of the assembled representatives, but there were still those who doubted him, who questioned his motives. It was Rosamund who ultimately swayed the council. She rose to speak, her voice clear and strong, her gaze unwavering. "I was forced to marry Edmund de Clare," she said. "I was his enemy, his captive. I hated him. I blamed him for the death of my brother, for the suffering of my people." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the hall. "But I came to know him," she continued. "I saw his heart, his honor, his compassion. I saw his pain, his grief, his desire for justice. And I fell in love with him." She spoke of Alara's murder, of the king's treachery, of Edmund's unwavering commitment to his people. She spoke of their shared dream of a better future, a future free from tyranny and oppression. "Edmund is not a perfect man," she said, "but he is a good man, a brave man, a just man. He is the leader we need to heal our kingdom, to unite our people, to build a new dawn." Her words, so heartfelt, so sincere, moved the council to silence. They saw in her not just a noblewoman, but a leader, a woman of courage and compassion, a woman who believed in her husband and in the future he represented. The council, swayed by Rosamund's powerful testimony and by Edmund's own commitment to justice, voted to recognize Edmund as the rightful ruler of the kingdom. But not as king. A nobleman rose. "Lord de Clare, you say you do not wish to be king. And we believe you. We have had enough of kings and their tyranny. We ask instead that you and Lady Rosamund rule together, as protectors of the realm, until such time as a new form of governance can be established, one that serves the people, not the other way around." The hall erupted in applause. Edmund and Rosamund looked at each other, stunned. This was not what they had expected. Edmund, humbled and honored by the trust placed in him and Rosamund, accepted the decision of the council. He would not be king, but he would be their protector, their leader, their servant. The council then issued a series of decrees aimed at reforming the kingdom, at establishing justice, and at healing the divisions caused by years of conflict. The king would be tried for his crimes, not by a court of nobles, but by a jury of his peers, representatives of the common folk. Lands and titles that had been unjustly seized by the king would be returned to their rightful owners. Taxes would be lowered, and trade would be encouraged to promote prosperity and economic recovery. A new system of laws would be established based on fairness, equality, and justice for all. But the most significant decree, the one that would forever be remembered in the annals of the kingdom, was the one proposed by Rosamund. "We must learn from the past," she said. "We must remember the suffering, the injustice, the violence that has plagued our realm. We must ensure that such tyranny never happens again." She proposed the creation of a council of advisors, elected by the people, to advise the protectors and to participate in the governance of the kingdom. This council would represent all segments of society, nobles, clergy, and common folk, ensuring that the voices of all were heard. The council, recognizing the wisdom of Rosamund's proposal, adopted it unanimously. It was a revolutionary idea, a radical departure from the traditional feudal system, a step towards a more democratic and just form of government. The decrees were announced to the people of Westminster, who greeted them with cheers and applause. They had overthrown a tyrant, they had established a new order, they had chosen their own leaders, and they had embraced a future filled with hope and promise. Edmund and Rosamund, standing on the balcony of the castle, overlooking the cheering crowds, knew that their work had just begun. They had a kingdom to rebuild, a people to unite, a future to create. But they were ready to face the challenges ahead, their hearts united, their spirits unyielding, their love a beacon in the darkness. The Queen's decree, a testament to Rosamund's wisdom and compassion, had laid the foundation for a new era, an era of peace, justice, and hope. And as the sun set over Westminster, casting a golden glow upon the city, it seemed that a new dawn had truly arrived.
Epilogue.
Years passed, and the reign of Edmund and Rosamund, the protectors of the realm, became known as a golden age, a time of peace, prosperity, and justice. The wounds of the past slowly healed, the divisions within the kingdom gradually faded, and a new sense of unity and purpose emerged. The Council of Advisors, elected by the people, proved to be a wise and effective governing body, ensuring that the voices of all were heard and that the needs of all were met. The laws were reformed, trade flourished, and the arts and sciences thrived. Edmund, guided by his own sense of justice and compassion, proved to be a wise and effective leader. He ruled not through fear and violence, but through fairness and understanding. He listened to his advisors, he respected the rights of his people, and he strove to create a realm where all could live in peace and harmony. Rosamund, ever at his side, played a crucial role in shaping their reign. She was not just a wife, but a partner, an advisor, a leader in her own right. She championed the cause of the poor and the oppressed, she promoted education and the arts, and she worked tirelessly to heal the divisions within the kingdom. She also bore Edmund 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, ensuring the continuation of their lineage and the stability of the realm. The children were raised with a strong sense of justice, compassion, and responsibility, instilled with the values that had guided their parents' reign. The memory of Alara, though still a source of sadness for Edmund, became a symbol of the injustices of the past and a reminder of the importance of fighting for a better future. A memorial was erected in her honor, a beautiful garden where people could come to reflect on the past and to find solace in the present. Gareth, having proven his loyalty and his commitment to justice, became a trusted advisor to Edmund and Rosamund, serving on the council and playing a key role in shaping the new realm. He eventually married and had children of his own, his past as a rebel forgiven and forgotten. Sir Kevern, the knight who had betrayed Baldric and joined a rebellion, became a symbol of redemption, a testament to the power of forgiveness and second chances. He served Edmund and Rosamund faithfully, becoming a renowned warrior and a respected leader. The former king, Henry, was tried for his crimes and found guilty. He was stripped of his title and his wealth, and sentenced to live out his days in a remote monastery, a harsh but just punishment for his tyranny. As the years passed, Edmund and Rosamund grew old together, their love for each other deepening with each passing day. They had faced many challenges, overcome many obstacles, but they had always remained true to each other, to their people, and to their ideals. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of Westminster Castle, overlooking the city that had once been the heart of a tyrannical kingdom but was now a beacon of hope and justice, Edmund took Rosamund's hand, his touch gentle and loving. "We did it, Rosamund," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We built a better world." Rosamund smiled, her eyes meeting his. "We did," she replied. Together, they watched as the sun set over Westminster, casting a golden glow upon the city, a symbol of the new dawn they had created. They had come a long way, the betrayer's bride and the betrayed lord, from enemies to lovers, from captives to rulers. They had faced war, betrayal, and loss, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply in love. Their reign would be remembered as a time of transformation, a time when a kingdom had been reborn, a time when justice had prevailed, and a time when love had conquered all. And as they held each other close, their hearts filled with gratitude and peace, they knew that their legacy would live on, a testament to the enduring power of hope, courage, and the unwavering bond between two souls who had found each other in the midst of chaos and conflict. The story was over, but their legend had just begun. The scars remained, a reminder of the battles fought, but they were also a symbol of strength, resilience, and the enduring power of love.